Goeiedag, mijn naam is Evan, ik ben immigratie-procureur here in America, and ik wil jou help om immigratiewet te verstaan. Now, a lot of you have been sending me message requests asking about your upcoming interview with USCIS if you are going through the refugee program. For those of you who are going through the asylum program, remember, if you have an attorney, that attorney will brief you and prep you for it. But if you don't, this is equally relevant to y'all as well. So remember that with both the refugee program and with asylum, your goal, I guess, is the only way to put it, is to prove to the government that you have a well-founded fear of future persecution, right? That can be done in two ways. By, in the refugee program, articulating past persecution, or the same in an asylum applicant, is to prove that you've suffered persecution in the past. That gives you a rebuttable presumption of that well-founded fear of future persecution. Rebuttable because on the asylum side, for example, if you prove that you did suffer severe persecution, the U.S. government can come back and say, okay, we agree that it was persecution and it was done by the government or someone the government is unable and willing to control due to an immutable characteristic. However, conditions in that country have changed. Therefore, it's no longer objectively reasonable to believe that, or to see that you have a well-founded fear of future persecution because the persecutor or the conditions are gone. So hopefully that makes sense. With the refugee program, for those of you going for your interviews, not that initial, we're really talking about the USCIS interview here by a refugee officer. You have that same opportunity. You can articulate past persecution and the well-founded fear, or the well-founded fear of future persecution. I advise you to articulate both. But a lot of people have been asking me about past persecution and even persecution in general. So that's what I wanted to discuss today because, as many of you know, with the law firm that I work for the most part, I'm their appellate attorney, meaning that in the 3 stages of asylum, affirmative asylum, then if you get denied, you get referred to immigration court, you get put in removal proceedings, and if you lose in immigration court, you can appeal to the Board of Immigration Appeals, the federal level, and say that the immigration judge got it wrong for the most part, right? I usually take over at that point. I write briefs to the Board of Immigration Appeals. And I received a denial from the BIA today for a case that I want to give you excerpts from to show you when I've told my asylum seekers, my Afrikaner asylum seekers here, and even refugees of how difficult it is to prove persecution. Because, as you know, persecution is defined as more than mere discrimination or harassment. It rises to extreme levels of conduct. So to simply say something like BEE or economic issues has never and will never rise to the level of persecution. Now, for example, like I helped many people, I made that evidence packet of country conditions. Are the economic laws included in there? Of course, but they're lagniappe, or in Louisiana, that's a term for a little something extra, right? To add on top of what the latest State Department report and issues like Malema and the farm murders and all of that clearly show are extreme levels of conduct, violence, death, that sort of thing, as long as it can be connected, the nexus, right, the persecution to that protected ground. And that's some of the things that we're going to talk about today. So the reason that I'm bringing this up is not to scare you, and I'm not being negative about this, but I want you to understand what the U.S. government truly defines as persecution. So in this case, this poor individual, I'll give you his background and tell you what happened. Then you can pause it, take a moment, and I already told you it was dismissed, but, think, would you consider this persecution? Make a long story short, he is an Egyptian Coptic Christian, I believe. I know he's a Christian. I believe he's Coptic, in Egypt, and he was, on 2 separate occasions and one threat, he was attacked by 3 men for being a Christian, and one of these times he was actually hospitalized for it. So he was brutally attacked twice, and he was threatened once because he's a Christian. And they wanted him to convert to Islam, right? Now that story alone, right there, if you've been following me for long enough, you should know. You should have instantly recognized the problem. But it's not the problem we're going to discuss today. Who are these 3 individuals? Remember, it's by the government or someone the government is unable or unwilling to control. So if these 3 individuals are just punks, and they're just attacking him because he's a Christian, but he could have gone to the police and the police would have stopped it or helped him, then it doesn't matter if the acts were actually persecution. That's the important thing. You can lose an asylum, and I'm talking to asylees here, but remember the nomenclature and words still work. You can lose an asylum claim where an immigration judge or a USCIS asylum officer looks and says, this is persecution 100%. It rises to that extreme level of conduct. It goes above mere discrimination or harassment. However, it wasn't by the government or someone the government is unable or unwilling to control. Right? I've seen instances where poor individuals didn't think they can go to the police, and probably rightly so, but they didn't go to the police, they didn't file a police report, so the immigration judge said, we don't have any evidence or proof that the government can't control these people or won't because you didn't go to the police. So hopefully that makes sense, right? So right there, you should have been like, well, who are these three people? But that's not the point today. The point today is I want you to see what the Board of Immigration Appeals, the federal level, considers to be persecution. So long story short, the immigration judge denied his claim for many reasons, but I'll read you the BIA's decision. It says, the immigration judge determined the harm the respondent experienced does not rise to the level of persecution. Okay? Now, the respondent claims that three individuals did the following. One, beat him, resulting in minor wounds. Okay, so he was beaten. And I don't know, I've been wrestling and jiu-jitsu for a long time now. I've gotten minor beatings. Minor beatings still hurt, right? And if you attack me, that's still a violent act, even if there's only minor wounds. Second, they threatened him by telephone, and to give you some, they threatened him saying that they wanted him to convert to Islam, and they were going to continue to do this. So the threat is consistent, ongoing. And three, a third time, they beat him with long weapons, resulting in loss of consciousness, bruises, a broken arm, and hospitalization. The respondent, that's this person, contends the three incidents, when considered cumulatively, because you can look at issues in the aggregate, meaning you can look at, hey, this only happened twice, but they threatened me, so it's going to happen again. So let's look at this as a whole, right? That when considering this cumulatively and the pattern of escalating violence, threats, and injuries, support a finding of persecution. That's the argument that I made. It's citing the brief that I wrote to them. Now, they said the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit, that's because this case was in Louisiana, it falls under the Fifth Circuit. That might be confusing for some of y'all, but it doesn't matter. This is generally accepted almost everywhere between the circuits. The Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals defines persecution as extreme conduct that constitutes a sustained, systematic effort to target an individual on the basis of a protected ground. So persecution has to be systematic. It has to be sustained. It has to be ongoing. And it has to be because of a protected ground, in your case, Afrikaners, because of your race, right? It then says, it cites another case that says, explaining that even those subject to brutal physical attack and egregious and violent behavior are not necessarily victims of persecution. Okay? So do you see how mind-blowing that is? So it has to be sustained, systematic effort to target individuals on the basis of a protected ground. And the court then went on in the Fifth Circuit to say that even if you are subject to a brutal physical attack or an egregious and violent behavior, that doesn't necessarily make you a victim of persecution. Another case that it cited said, no persecution when an individual was twice beaten, including once until unconscious and resulting in a swollen shoulder or leg. Resulting in a swollen shoulder and a leg. So this person was beaten twice and suffered serious injuries, but the court said it didn't rise to persecution. Now, we don't necessarily know why, right? But was it sustained? Was it systematic? Was it ongoing, right? We're only talking about the violence here, the persecution. Nothing to do with the government being involved or who the people are. Because remember, the courts and even your USCIS asylum officer and refugee officer might look at something and say, yes, that did rise to the level of persecution, but it wasn't the government, or it wasn't something the government can't control, or it wasn't because of a protected ground. Here, we're only looking at what the definition of persecution is, that level of violence. It goes on, citing another case, no persecution when an individual was beaten twice again and hospitalized for bruises, a broken rib, trouble breathing from tear gas, and overnight hospitalization. So in this case, The BIA concluded that the immigration judge permissibly determined that the threats and harm suffered by the respondent, while serious, do not rise to the level of persecution. So again, they cited that persecution has to be systematic, sustained pattern of assaults or other acts of oppression. When I wrote this brief, it seemed systematic. It seemed like it was ongoing. There were threats. It was escalating. Federal government, the BIA disagreed. So again, I'm not trying to dissuade, and this is really more focused on the asylum seekers to show you how difficult this is, right, to prove past persecution. But even for refugees, I really want you, when you go into your interview, to be prepared. And of course, say everything, right? Put it all out there. If something happened to you, even if it doesn't meet the requirements, you still put it out there because it can't hurt. In your case, asylee is a different story, right? Because the burden is on you. You've got to be very selective and careful with what you throw out there. And you've got to be precise to meet those definitions. Refugees, a little different. It says articulate. But remember, your goal is to show that what you suffered, so we're not talking about future, we're talking about what you suffered, was extreme and outrageous, above mere discrimination, and that it was done by the government or someone the government can't or won't control, and it is because of your race, you being an Afrikaner. So in this case, I just wanted to show you that simply getting beat up, and that sounds terrible, but you understand my point, being beat up, being attacked once, twice, 3 times, the immigration courts here have held on many different occasions that violence, right, because that's extreme conduct, but it didn't rise to the level of persecution. So hopefully this helps you understand why asylum is so very difficult and what the courts have held here in the past, and why I'm just trying to tell you refugees to be prepared in order to be able to articulate this at the level that I would say be as prepared as an asylee is, so that way you don't leave anything off. So when I tell you how difficult asylum is, I would expect, if this is serious to you, to be as prepared as an asylee would be when you go in to your USCIS refugee officer to explain the persecution you suffered in the past or in the future. And if you haven't suffered in the past, don't worry, but when you're talking about that future persecution, remember, you've got to be afraid of stuff like this: multiple beatings, attacks, killings. Killing is really one of those ultimate things, right? Because it's there's no more, right? It can't be systematic. You're just dead. So, but you do the kill the boar, the one bullet, one set of those sort of things. So again, hopefully this helps. That is my mission here. Thank you so much for those of you who are loyal. For those of you who have invested in that country conditions evidence packet I put together, I really appreciate it. I don't want to get too much into it here, but it's helping me out more than you could possibly understand, because I've got some things coming in the near future. So, but everything's fine, don't worry. But I did just want to put that out there, that you are helping me more than you know. And your kind words have motivated me to continue doing this as long as I possibly can. Who knows how long that'll be for. One more video, 100 more videos, we don't know. But for the near future, I'm here to help in any way that I can. So thank you. Remember to like, subscribe, share, and I'll see you for the next video.